The GPS died somewhere past Mexican Hat, but Emma said she knew the way. That should have been my first warning. It was supposed to be a simple drive, a weekend visit to meet the family of the woman I loved. 8 months of dating, countless texts and phone calls, but always with a distance between us. Until now. Now, finally, I was about to cross that invisible line. Emma had been quiet for much of the ride, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly I could see the knuckles turn white. There was a tension beneath her calm that I couldn't shake. "You okay, babe?" I asked again, this time trying to keep my voice light, hoping to break through whatever cloud was hanging over her. "You've been quiet since we passed that last town." She glanced at me, eyes shuttered with exhaustion or maybe fear. I couldn't tell. "Just tired. We're almost there." Usually, Emma was the life of the car, pointing out rock formations and telling me stories about hiking through those canyons with her dad, or reminiscing about the old Navajo legends her grandmother used to tell her. But now, she was distant, like a shadow of herself, focused only on the road ahead. The scenery was breathtaking, if somewhat intimidating. The desert stretched in endless waves of ochre and crimson, the sun slipping low behind jagged cliffs, casting long, sinister shadows across the land. I wanted to admire it, but my eyes flickered nervously to the roadside, where dead animals lay in various states of decay, mostly deer, but also the occasional coyote. Their lifeless eyes staring back at us seemed like warnings I didn't want to hear. And the ravens. God, so many ravens. They sat like silent sentries on every fence post and power line, their black eyes glinting with unnatural intelligence. I swear I saw some tilt their heads as we passed, as if assessing us. "Emma, where exactly are we going?" I pressed, my voice tinged with worry. "The GPS has been out for like an hour." "Bluff," she said without looking away. "It's a small town, very traditional." "Traditional how?" Silence. Long, heavy silence. "They keep to themselves. Don't like outsiders much," she finally said. My stomach tightened. Meeting the family was one thing, but meeting a family that seemed distrustful, even hostile to outsiders, was another. City people, outsiders, me. The radio had been anything but comforting. It crackled incessantly with static, catching snippets of a far-off AM station before devolving into white noise again and again. I killed it, letting the hum of the engine and the bleak landscape fill the silence. Then, suddenly, the sign appeared. Bluff, population 298, established 1880. The town seemed to rise from the desert like a mirage, framed perfectly by the crimson cliffs that hugged the horizon. Main Street stretched out before us, its neat little shops and painted storefronts looking frozen in time. It was the sort of place where everyone knew your name, or so I thought, because the streets were empty. "Where is everyone?" I breathed, scanning the sidewalks, the porches, the dusty road. Lights glowed warmly from the shop windows, spilling golden puddles onto the cracked pavement. Pots and necklaces glittered on displays. The diner's neon open sign buzzed softly. Yet nobody moved. No footsteps, no dogs barking, no children playing. Emma's answer was the same as before. "People keep to themselves, very traditional. It's dinner time. Everyone's home with family." It made sense, on some level, but the silence pressed on me like a physical weight. The uncanny stillness felt wrong. Towns, no matter how small, rarely go entirely silent. As we rolled slowly down Main Street, something else caught my eye. Mannequins. Dozens of them in every shop window, posed facing outward as if they were guarding the empty streets. Their blank faces stared through the glass with unnerving, unblinking eyes. The hair salon mannequins looked lifelike enough to be models. The general store mannequins wore faded aprons. Even the hardware store had one clutching a battered hammer. "That's weird," I murmured. "What?" All those mannequins. It's like they're watching us." Emma's grip on the wheel tightened, her foot pressing harder on the accelerator. "You're imagining things." We left Main Street behind, gravel crunching under the tires as we wound up a narrow dirt road. The air grew cooler, the brush thicker, the shadows longer and deeper. The drive had taken most of the day, longer than I'd anticipated. It was almost sundown when Emma said we were close. Everything back there looked forgotten, left behind by time and progress. I replayed the hours in my head, the miles slipping below the wheels, the feeling of something unseen trailing us. After about 5 minutes, the house appeared. A sprawling ranch-style home, its dark wood siding glowing softly in the warm porch light. Curtains fluttered in the breeze, and the soft hum of an old porch swing creaked in the silence. Something beneath the surface urged me to flee, but Emma's hand on the gear shift reminded me why I was here. The air in Bluff had a dryness that clung to your skin, the kind that made every breath feel sharp and every shadow deeper. As we pulled closer to the house, a chill ran along my spine, although the night was warm. Moths wobbled erratically around the porch lights, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely, haunting sound that seemed to echo the unease I felt. The front door swung open before we even had a chance to step out. A woman emerged, middle-aged, her graying hair pulled tight into a bun. Her smile was wide, too wide, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. "Emma, and you must be Michael." Her voice was sharp, quick, excited. She rushed down the steps and enveloped me in a hug that was just a little too long, too close. There was an odd scent clinging to her, not perfume or soap, but something earthy, wild, like damp fur. Emma's hand trembled slightly on the door handle as she opened it. The instant her mother's smile fell on me, I felt as though I were under a microscope. It wasn't just the hug that lingered uncomfortably long or the strange smell. It was the way they looked at me, like I was an object to be examined, dissected, and judged. "Great to meet you, Mrs." Emma spoke up before I could ask. "Patricia, Mom." "Oh, call me Patricia, honey. We're not formal here." Behind her came a man, tall and broad-shouldered, hair dusted with gray, eyes a piercing cold blue. His handshake was firm to the point of hurt, his gaze sharp and unwavering. Robert's handshake was more than just firm, it was possessive. When he said family didn't use titles, I felt like an outsider being stripped of my identity, replaced before I even had a chance. "Robert," he said gruffly, "Emma's father. Welcome to our home." "Thanks for having me, sir." He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sir? We're going to be family, Michael. Family doesn't use titles." Family. The word twisted in my gut uncomfortably. Engagements had never been discussed, but here they were speaking as if it was already decided. A younger man appeared then, tall and lean, with thick dark hair and a predatory glint in his eyes. He didn't smile or offer a hand. Instead, he studied me like a wolf sizing up its prey. Jake, for his part, barely said a word but stared so intently it was like he was reading every line of my face, memorizing my reactions, my smallest gestures. When his eyes darted, watching me instead of the conversation, I felt a primal urge to run. "This is Jake, Emma's brother," Patricia said. Jake nodded curtly, never breaking his stare. I swallowed hard. Robert took my duffel bag without waiting for my protest. "Let's get you inside." Patricia's made dinner. The house was warm, filled with rich southwestern colors and Native American art, yet something was terribly wrong. Inside, the house smelled of earth and something older and darker. The walls seemed too thick, pressing in. The furniture felt heavy and too solid, like it was meant to anchor something, some secret. I noticed immediately no mirrors anywhere. Not on the walls, not above the mantel, nowhere. Some houses didn't have many mirrors, but an entire absence was eerie. Through the living room, I noticed the art on the walls, Stylized Navajo patterns intertwined with animal motifs, but they felt less like decorations and more like warnings etched into the very fabric of the house. No mirrors? We're religious, Patricia answered quickly. Very traditional beliefs about vanity. Family photos covered every surface, but their smiles were too perfect, their eyes too still. Something just didn't feel right. Robert offered a brief tour. The kitchen was spotless, the living room cozy. Yet I noticed something else. Scratches on the door frames at shoulder height, claw-like marks, not quite human. During the tour, the scratches on door frames looked fresher than they should have, the raw wood splintered in places. I imagined sharp claws, unnatural strength, and something other than human effort. The basement door was thick and reinforced with multiple locks. Just storage, Robert shrugged. Nothing worth worrying about. Dinner was lit not by electric lights, but candles and oil lamps. The flickering flames threw everything into sharp relief, shadows dancing along the walls. Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. Her presence filled the room almost unbearably. The way she looked at me was not of a welcoming moth, but a predator narrowed on its prey. And Robert, standing silently, was the cold enforcer. Each nod, each glance precise and measured, as if calculating every move I made. The meal looked enticing. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans. But when I cut into the meat, it was still raw inside, blood dripping onto my plate. "Is this really done?" I asked. "We like it rare." Robert smiled, "More nutritious." I ate cautiously, focusing on the veggies to mask the strange metallic taste of the meat. The conversation turned sharp. It wasn't discussion, it was interrogation. Each family member took turns firing off questions designed to expose my life. Dining room conversations were clinical, precise, viciously polite interrogations. Each question dissected my life. "What time do you wake up?" 7, usually. Step by step. "What do you do on weekends, Michael?" "I usually check emails, relax, sometimes call friends." "What's your favorite memory with Emma?" A question I wasn't ready for. "Our trip hiking last spring," I answered cautiously. They leaned in as if the answer contained some secret. I hesitated, then answered more out of fear than willingness. "We like to know everything about family," Jake said, his voice cold, emphasizing every word. Emma sat silently, pushing food around her plate, avoiding eye contact. Emma didn't seem like herself. Her hands trembled behind her back during the tour. She avoided my gaze, and when we finally sat down to dinner, she barely touched the food. There was a weight behind her silence, like she was struggling against invisible chains. "Tell us about your coworkers," Robert demanded. "Who would miss you if you took a long vacation?" The question hit me like a slap. The questions at the table were relentless and invasive. I knew no matter how carefully I answered, I was shifting under their gaze. "Why do you want to know?" Patricia's eyes softened on Emma's hand. "We worry about Emma being so far from home. We want to know she's secure." When Patricia said they worried about Emma, something in her gaze flickered. A warning or a threat, I wasn't sure which. There was something terrifying about the careful politeness that masked something ancient and hungry beneath. Excusing myself, I wandered down the hallway, my nerves fraying. After dinner, wandering the hallways felt like stepping into a maze. The quiet seemed unnatural, amplified with every creak of the floorboards under my feet. While wandering the dimly lit corridors, my mind was a storm of doubt, fear, and confusion. The scratches on the walls prickled at my skin, the locked basement door a silent threat. I had to see what was behind it. Then I found it, a door slightly ajar. The door to the storage room beckoned like a forbidden promise. Peering in revealed something horrifying. Driver's licenses from dozens of people, arranged neatly across a table. Jewelry, wedding rings, watches, necklaces, gleaming under a single bulb. Photographs of strangers smiling eerily in loneliness. Inside, the evidence of vanished lives chilled me. It wasn't just the objects themselves, but the care with which they were laid out, preserved. When I pushed the door slightly open, the room's contents froze my blood. Relics of lives stolen, each piece telling a story I wasn't meant to uncover. Footsteps. I wasn't alone. I heard footsteps too late. "You shouldn't have gone in there," said a voice behind me. Patricia stood in the doorway. Her smile vanished, replaced by cold calculation. Patricia's voice was no longer warm. It was an edge. "What is this?" "Donations," she said smoothly, "from people who moved away. We keep memories." "Memories," she said. "Everyone leaves something behind. Some leave much more than they know. Memories are all we keep when the body is gone." My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream, run, but my legs refused. Back in the dining room, the family exchanged glances that were too quick, too knowing. The evening faded into an oppressive silence. I could hear voices discussing things I wasn't meant to hear: the family, the plans for Emma, for me. That night, in the guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding. The voices from the living room seemed distant but urgent. That night in bed, sleep was impossible. Then the scratching began, claws scraping against the wood and plaster, footsteps thudding on the roof, the noises outside, the scratching, the footsteps, the whispers calling my name, pressed against my sanity. I crept to the window and looked out. A shadow moved, too tall to be human, its limbs long and awkward. The silhouette I saw coming from the shadows was a nightmare sculpted from human fears, limbs too long, a grotesque mockery of humanity. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving me trembling. It disappeared as if swallowed by the night itself. Lying back down, I tried to convince myself it was fear playing tricks. But as the scratching continued and whispers brushed against the window pane, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. I told myself it was nerves, that my imagination had twisted the desert's shadows. But as the scratching and whispering continued, I knew one thing for certain. I shouldn't be here. I lay back down, heart hammering in my chest. My thoughts spiraled into the worst possibilities. What if this family had plans for me? What if Emma was gone, replaced by someone or something else? Could I even trust my own mind anymore? All I knew was that tomorrow would bring answers, or maybe only deeper nightmares. But one thing was clear. I had crossed into a place where nothing was what it seemed, and the line between friend and foe had already blurred. I should have trusted my instincts. And yet, here I was. I woke up to Emma staring at me, not sleeping beside me, sitting in the chair, fully dressed, just staring. The morning light filtered weakly through the heavy curtains, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch across the cold, empty room. Her eyes held an unreadable mixture of fear and sadness, but there was something else there too, something that made my skin crawl. "How long have you been watching me?" I asked, my voice hoarse from sleep. I wanted to make sure you slept well," she replied, her voice flat and mechanical. It was the same tone she'd used in the car yesterday, like she was reading from a script. Emma had always been an early riser, sure, but this was different. Her clothes were the same ones she'd worn to dinner last night, the blue blouse, the dark jeans. No signs of having changed or gone through any kind of morning routine, and breakfast was already waiting downstairs, perfectly prepared as if someone had known exactly when I'd wake up. "Are you okay?" I pressed, sitting up in bed. "You're acting—" "I'm fine. We should go downstairs." She cut me off, standing abruptly and heading for the door without another word. The silence between us felt thick and oppressive as we made our way to the dining room. Patricia was already there, that same too wide smile from yesterday plastered across her face. "Good morning, Michael. I hope you slept well. I made your favorite." pancakes and bacon." She gestured to a plate that was indeed exactly what I liked for breakfast, though I couldn't remember ever telling Emma's family about my food preferences. "Thanks," I managed, though my appetite had vanished. The bacon looked perfectly crispy, the pancakes golden brown, but something about the whole scene felt staged. Robert appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand. "Beautiful morning for a tour of the town," he announced. "Emma can show you around, get you acquainted with the area." "That sounds great," I said, though the thought of spending more time in that empty place made my stomach twist. Emma nodded mutely, still avoiding eye contact. Jake slouched against the kitchen counter, watching me with that same predatory intensity as yesterday. When I caught his stare, he didn't look away, just kept watching like he was studying me. An hour later, Emma and I walked down Main Street in the harsh morning sun. If anything, the town looked even more deserted in daylight. The silence was absolute. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, not even the distant hum of air conditioning units. Just our footsteps echoing off the empty buildings. "Where is everyone, Emma?" I asked for what felt like the 100th time. "This is getting weird." "They're around," she said quietly. "People here don't like strangers much, especially on weekends." We stopped in front of the general store. The windows were spotless, displaying neat rows of canned goods and fresh produce. A sign on the door read, "Open," but when I tried the handle, it wouldn't budge. "It's locked," I said. Emma shrugged. "Must be on break." But the coffee shop next door had steaming mugs sitting on tables visible through the window. The hardware store had its lights on, tools arranged perfectly on display racks. Everything looked ready for business, just waiting for customers who would never come. At the small church on the corner, fresh flowers adorned the steps, and hymn books lay open on the pews. I could see them through the propped open doors. The pages were turned to a hymn about joining the eternal family, words that made my blood run cold after last night's dinner conversation. "This is insane," I muttered. "It's like everyone just vanished." "Saturday's a day of preparation," Emma said, using that same careful tone her family had used. "Very traditional here." As we rounded the corner, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. Jake emerged from between two buildings, moving with an unnatural silence. He didn't say anything, just fell into step behind us at a distance, watching. "Your brother's following us," I told Emma. She glanced back, and for just a moment, I saw genuine fear flash across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by that empty expression. "He's just protective." We walked the entire main drag without seeing another soul. Every storefront was maintained, every display perfect, but it all felt like a movie set. Beautiful and detailed, but completely hollow. When we returned to the house, I excused myself to use the bathroom and deliberately took a wrong turn in the hallway. The house seemed larger in daylight, with more corridors and rooms than I'd noticed yesterday. The scratches on the door frames looked fresh, like something had been marking territory recently. That's when I found the door I'd glimpsed yesterday, the one Robert had dismissed as storage. This time, it was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices coming from inside. Low, urgent whispers that stopped the moment I approached. I pushed the door open wider. The room was bigger than I'd expected, filled with shelves that lined every wall. But it wasn't storage, it was a museum of people who were no longer here. Driver's licenses were arranged in neat rows, dozens of them, all from different states. Wedding rings and watches gleamed under a single bare bulb. Photographs of smiling strangers covered one entire wall, all individual portraits like yearbook photos or ID pictures. Personal items filled bins and boxes, cell phones, wallets, car keys, even clothes sorted by size and gender. At the far end of the room, a journal lay open on a small table. I crept closer and read the visible page. Subject number 23, Michael Chen, Age 29, Phoenix, Arizona, attached to girlfriend Sarah for 6 months, no close family, works remotely, minimal social connections, integration timeline, 3 weeks. My hands shook as I flipped to other pages. There were entries for dozens of people, all with similar details about their lives, their relationships, their vulnerabilities, all with integration timelines. You shouldn't have gone in there. I spun around to find Patricia standing in the doorway. Her smile was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "What is this place?" My voice came out as a whisper. "A collection," she said, stepping into the room. "Memories of those who became part of our family. These are people's belongings, their IDs. What happened to them?" Patricia's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "They found their place, just like you will. I want to leave. Now." "I'm afraid that's not possible, Michael." Robert's voice came from behind me. I hadn't heard him approach, but there he was, blocking the doorway with his massive frame. "You've seen too much now." Panic rose in my throat. "Emma!" I called out, hoping she could somehow help me make sense of this nightmare. Emma appeared beside her father, but when she looked at me, there was no recognition in her eyes. No love, no concern, just a blank stare that made my blood freeze. "Emma, what's happening? What is this place?" She opened her mouth as if to speak, then seemed to struggle with the words. For a moment, her face contorted with what looked like pain or effort. Michael," she whispered, and her voice sounded different, more like the Emma I knew. "If I told you something crazy, would you believe me?" Hope flared in my chest. "What? Tell me. What if I wasn't who you think I am?" Before I could respond, Patricia's sharp voice cut through the air. "Emma, come help with lunch preparations." The moment was broken. Emma's face shifted back to that empty expression, and she turned away without another word. "Never mind," she said in that flat tone. "I'm being silly." But I had seen something real in her eyes, terror, and maybe a desperate plea for help. Robert gestured toward the door. "Shall we?" Patricia's prepared a wonderful meal. I didn't have a choice. With Patricia behind me and Robert in front, I was herded back to the dining room like livestock. Lunch was a tense affair. The family's questions continued, more invasive than ever. "Tell us about your parents, Michael," Robert said, cutting into his meat with deliberate precision. "Their daily habits? Do they call you often? Why do you need to know that?" Jake spoke up from across the table, his voice deeper than yesterday, almost a growl. "We're going to be family soon. Family knows everything about family." The way he said family made my skin crawl. There was something possessive about it, something that suggested I had no choice in the matter. Emma sat silently beside me, mechanically moving food around her plate. When I tried to catch her eye, she stared right through me. After lunch, they insisted on showing me their evening tradition. Patricia lit candles around the living room while Robert and Jake arranged strange symbols in the dirt outside the front door. The symbols looked vaguely Native American, but wrong somehow, like someone had learned them from a book and gotten the details backwards. "What kind of tradition is this?" I asked, my unease growing by the minute. "An old one," Patricia said, her eyes gleaming in the candlelight. "About welcoming new family members. I think I'll skip it. Actually, I should probably head back to the hotel." "What hotel?" Robert interrupted. "There's no hotel in Bluff, son." My blood ran cold. "Then I'll drive back to car trouble, I'm afraid." Jake appeared beside me, holding up what looked like a distributor cap. "Found this lying on the ground by your Honda. Probably fell out." The smug look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. They had sabotaged my car. "Give me my keys," I demanded. "What keys?" Patricia asked innocently. I was trapped. Completely, utterly trapped in this house with these people who weren't quite people, in this town that wasn't quite a town. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the desert, I heard it, the sound that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. Low voices speaking in unison, echoing from multiple directions around the house. Not quite human voices, but close enough to fool someone who wasn't listening carefully. I crept to the living room window and peered out into the gathering darkness. At first, I saw nothing but desert scrub and red rock formations. Then, something moved. A shadow that was too tall, too angular to be human. It flowed across the landscape with impossible grace, and for just a moment, I swear I saw Patricia's face on that writhing form. Behind me, Emma approached with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Michael," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." But even as she apologized, her voice had that same flat quality, like she was reciting lines she'd been forced to memorize. That's when I realized the horrible truth. The woman I loved was gone. Whatever was wearing her face, speaking with her voice, it wasn't Emma. The real Emma was somewhere else, or maybe she was dead, and this thing had taken her place. I was completely alone, trapped in a house full of monsters who wore human faces, in a town that existed to lure people like me to their doom. And somewhere in the darkness outside, more of them were circling the house, waiting. At midnight, the house settled into a heavy silence that pressed upon me like a living thing. The family had stopped pretending hours ago, but now even the facade of normalcy crumbled completely. Candlelight flickered across old wooden beams, casting long, quivering shadows that seemed to slither along the walls like living entities. The family gathered quietly in the living room, their faces calm, but their eyes dark like wells containing ancient, terrible secrets. I sat frozen in the armchair, dread curling tight in my chest like a coiled serpent. The air itself felt thick, charged with malevolent energy that made my skin crawl and my nerves sing with warning. Robert's voice cut through the oppressive stillness like a blade. "No point in the charade anymore, Michael. You've seen too much to let you leave unchanged." "What are you?" I demanded, struggling to keep my voice steady, even as terror threatened to strangle the words in my throat. Patricia's smile was a cold, hollow thing, void of any human warmth. "We are what your people call skinwalkers, though that name is just simplistic. A story your kind tells to make sense of something far older and more complex." Jake leaned forward from his position near the window, and I watched in horror as his neck elongated impossibly, vertebrae popping and stretching as his face began to shift and twist. "Native American folklore? Stories to scare children?" His voice dropped to an inhuman growl. "We find those legends quite useful for hiding in plain sight." The transformation began in earnest then. Limbs stretched beyond human proportions, faces blurred and reformed, skin rippling and shifting from human flesh to something feral and predatory. Patricia's form contorted upward, becoming a tall, sinewy creature with glowing yellow eyes that held the savage intelligence of an apex predator. Jake's body folded and reshaped itself into something resembling a massive wolf, but wrong, too large, too aware, too malevolent. Robert towered above them all, a nightmare fusion of human and beast, muscle and fang and terrible ancient hunger. They were no longer pretending to be human. The masks had fallen away completely, revealing the monsters underneath. Patricia's voice, though distorted now by her transformation, carried an almost regretful tone. "We don't just kill and replace people, Michael. That would be crude, wasteful. We study. We learn. We become. Your Emma spent 6 months learning everything about you. Your mannerisms, your memories, your scars, even the most intimate details of how you make love." My stomach lurched as the full implications hit me. My eyes darted around the room, catching a glimpse of a figure slumped in the shadows near the stairs. The real Emma, barely recognizable, her hair matted with blood, her clothes torn, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Standing beside her was the thing that had been pretending to be her, flawless in every detail but completely empty of the warmth and life that had made Emma who she was. "Your Emma proved resistant," Patricia continued, her transformed features twisted into something that might have been disappointment. "Most originals break within weeks. She fought us for months, clinging to her memories of you. But she's ours now, body and soul." Robert's monstrous face contorted into what passed for a smile among his kind. 23 perfect replacements over 5 years, Michael. Not one person noticed. Not families, not friends, not lovers. We're spreading across the continent. Phoenix, Denver, Salt Lake City. Soon there will be more of us in your cities than you could possibly imagine. The scope of their operation, the patient malevolence behind it, made my head spin. These weren't simple monsters. They were an invasion force, slowly and systematically replacing human civilization from within. Jake's inhuman voice slithered through the air like poison. "You have 2 choices now, Michael. Join us willingly and become part of our family, or resist and become part of our collection." The real Emma stirred in the shadows, struggling to lift her head. When she spoke, her voice was raw and broken. "Michael, run. Please, run before they... What, dear?" The skinwalker Emma interrupted, her voice a perfect mimicry that made my heart ache with its familiarity. "Before they give you the gift of true belonging?" I looked between the 2 Emmas, my mind reeling. How do I know which one is real? The real Emma's eyes met mine, and despite her condition, I saw a flicker of the woman I loved. "The scar," she whispered. "On my shoulder, from when we went camping and you had to pull that cactus spine out." Both Emmas lifted their shirts simultaneously, revealing identical burn marks on their left shoulders. But there was a difference, subtle but crucial. The real Emma's scar was slightly raised, the skin puckered and discolored as scar tissue should be. The skinwalker's version was perfect, too perfect, the mark present but lacking the authentic texture of healed flesh. It was the cruelest mockery imaginable, yet it gave me the proof I desperately needed. "They steal everything," the real Emma whispered, tears streaming down her battered face. "Every memory, every moment we shared. They've been wearing my skin, sleeping in my bed, loving you with my stolen heart." Her words ignited something deep inside me, not just love, but fury at the violation of everything sacred between us. That's when panic seized me completely. I bolted from the chair, adrenaline flooding my system as survival instinct took over. Furniture crashed and splintered as I tore through the house, knocking over lamps and tables, desperately seeking an exit from this nightmare. Behind me, the family's monstrous cries echoed through the rooms, a symphony of inhuman sounds that spoke of hunger and hunt. Their speed was impossible. I could hear them moving through the house like liquid shadow, doors slamming shut behind me faster than any human could manage. Voices overlapped and multiplied, distorted by their transformations until I couldn't tell which direction they were coming from. The sounds seemed to bounce off the walls, creating an acoustic maze designed to disorient and trap. "You can't escape us, Michael," Jake's voice called from everywhere at once. "We know every inch of this desert, every cave, every crevice, every place you might think to hide." I scrambled through the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst. My lungs burned as I gasped for air, the walls seeming to close in with every desperate breath. Shadows moved independently of any light source, twisting and writhing as inhuman forms darted between rooms. Eyes gleamed from impossible angles, watching my every move with predatory patience. I burst through the back door, and the cold night air hit me like a physical blow. The desert stretched out before me, a vast open graveyard under a moonless sky that offered no comfort, only endless darkness punctuated by the sharp silhouettes of sagebrush and ancient rock formations. Behind me, the house erupted with sounds that no human throat could make. I didn't look back, couldn't look back, as I sprinted toward the maze of canyons that might offer shelter or simply a more scenic place to die. The stars above twirled in their cosmic dance as my lungs burned and my legs begged for respite, but stopping meant death. Every crunch of broken rock beneath my boots echoed through the vast emptiness like gunshots, announcing my location to anything listening. The cold night air cut into my lungs with every breath, sharp and unforgiving as a blade. I could swear the shadows themselves moved with malevolent purpose, shifting and flowing in ways that had nothing to do with wind or moonlight. Every rustle of dry brush behind me wasn't random. It was them, my pursuers, closing the distance with inhuman grace and patience. My mind churned through fragments of memory and desperate thoughts, a swirling chaos of disbelief, terror, and the primitive will to survive that drives all living things. Were these creatures truly as unstoppable as they seemed? How many others had run this same desperate race through the desert night? Was I already numbered among the dead? A distorted whisper drifted past my ear, so close I felt phantom breath on my neck. Michael. The voice was Emma's, but wrong, twisted and bent, as if carried on a wind that blew from some terrible dimension. I didn't dare stop to listen. If I slowed even for a second, the nightmare would swallow me whole. Branches and thorns clawed at my exposed skin, but I barely registered the pain. My world had narrowed to the simple equation of movement equals survival. I stumbled once on loose gravel, my hands scraping raw against sharp stone, and felt the creatures surge closer behind me. The sound of their pursuit wasn't quite footsteps, more like the whisper of wind through dry leaves, if leaves could move with deadly purpose. Panic clawed at my chest, tightening its grip with every passing second. The landscape rose before me, and I found myself at the edge of a deep ravine where jagged rocks and boulders descended into absolute blackness. Far below, the yawning earth seemed to beckon, a ready-made grave for anyone foolish enough to stumble in the dark. But beyond the rocky abyss, like a beacon in the wilderness, I saw salvation. The faint glow of light emanating from what looked like an old mining shack perched on a distant outcropping. Hope flared in my chest, giving me strength I didn't know I possessed. I pushed myself harder, muscles screaming in protest as I navigated the treacherous terrain. Behind me, inhuman sounds of frustration echoed off the canyon walls as my pursuers were forced to find their own way around the obstacles. The shack seemed both impossibly far and tantalizingly close as I scrambled over rocks and through narrow passages. My hands were bloody now, torn by sharp stone and thorny brush, but I barely noticed. All that mattered was reaching that light before the creatures reached me. When I finally stumbled through the door of the abandoned building, I collapsed onto the dusty wooden floor, my chest heaving as I fought to catch my breath. The air inside was stale and thick with decades of accumulated dust, but it felt like sanctuary compared to the nightmare landscape outside. Moonlight leaked through gaps in the weathered walls, creating pale rectangles on the floor that seemed to dance as clouds passed overhead. In one of these natural spotlights, I discovered a journal, its leather cover cracked with age, its pages brittle and yellow. With trembling hands, I opened the book and began to read by the faint light filtering through the walls. The entries were written in different hands, chronicling the experiences of those who had encountered the skinwalkers before me. Day 3. They mimic perfectly, but they can't fake everything. Sarah always stuttered when she was nervous, but this thing doesn't know that. I have to keep testing it, keep looking for the tells. Day 7. Found the real Sarah in their basement. What they did to her. She tried to warn me, even after everything they put her through. I think they keep the originals alive to study them, to perfect their copies. Day 12. If anyone finds this, know that they're spreading. Phoenix first, then Denver, then who knows where. They move like a plague, replacing people so gradually that no one notices until it's too late. Look for the ones who know too much about your life. Question every familiar face. Trust no one. Each entry was a window into someone else's nightmare, a roadmap through the horror I was experiencing. The recurring warnings gnawed at my sanity with their simple, terrible truth. In a world where monsters could steal faces and memories, how could you trust anyone? As I read deeper into the journal, the night crept forward around me, each passing minute thick with dread. Outside, I could hear them searching, distant sounds of movement, the occasional scrape of something against stone. They were being patient now, methodical. They knew I was trapped. Yet beneath the fear, a tiny ember of resolve began to glow. These pages represented more than just the accounts of victims. They were the testimonies of people who had fought back, who had recognized the threat and tried to warn others. I wasn't the first to face this horror, and if I survived, I hopefully wouldn't be the last. The brittle pages whispered their secrets as I turned them, each entry a testament to human resilience in the face of inhuman evil. Some writers had been consumed by fear, their words becoming increasingly erratic and desperate. Others had maintained a clinical detachment, cataloging the creature's behaviors and weaknesses with scientific precision. Outside the shack, the eerie silence that had fallen was suddenly shattered by distant, guttural sounds that seemed to echo from multiple directions at once. The hunt wasn't over. They were still out there, circling like vultures, waiting for me to make a mistake. But something was changing. Through the gaps in the walls, I could see the eastern horizon beginning to lighten. The first pale fingers of dawn were bleeding into the sky, painting the darkness with subtle shades of pink and gold. I watched in fascination and hope as something extraordinary happened. The nightmare creatures that had been stalking me began to shrink and retreat, their forms rippling and folding back into approximations of human shape. The horrific distortions faded from their faces, their bodies returning to something that could pass for normal in daylight. A collective hiss escaped their lips, low, venomous, and full of rage, as if the approaching sunlight caused them physical pain. Their movements became sluggish, uncertain, as whatever dark power sustained their transformations was weakened by the coming day. Light, I realized with growing excitement, wasn't just illumination. It was a weapon. The journal had mentioned this weakness in passing, but seeing it firsthand filled me with something I hadn't felt since this nightmare began: genuine hope. For the first time since arriving in Bluff, I believed I might actually survive. But even as relief flooded through me, fear twisted in my gut like a knife. This was only temporary salvation. The sun would set again in a matter of hours, and when it did, the hunt would resume with even greater intensity. They would be angry now, frustrated by their failure to capture me during the night. I clutched the journal like a talisman against despair, its weight somehow comforting in my blood-stained hands. The words of previous victims had become my lifeline, their warnings and observations the foundation for whatever plan I could formulate. Silence wrapped the shack like a heavy blanket as full daylight arrived. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, my body aching with exhaustion, but my mind racing with possibilities. The journal lay open before me, its pages filled with the accumulated wisdom of those who had fought this battle before me. I forced myself to think through the paralysis of fear, to shape terror into resolve. If this family of monsters had centuries of cunning and malice on their side, I had desperation and human ingenuity. The question was whether that would be enough. I needed a plan, not just for survival, but for escape. First, I had to survive the daylight hours while they were weakened. Then I had to find a way to get far enough from Bluff to reach help, assuming anyone would believe a story this incredible. Finally, and most importantly, I had to find a way to expose them before they could spread their infection to other communities. The thin morning light filtered through broken shutters, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. Around me, The isolated desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see whether I would become another victim or somehow find a way to fight back. I thought about Emma, the real Emma, broken and tortured, but still clinging to enough of herself to help me identify the imposter. How many others were trapped like her, their identities stolen while their bodies were kept alive as reference materials for the monsters wearing their faces? The scale of the horror was almost incomprehensible, but that only made it more important that someone survived to tell the story. I couldn't save the victims who had already been taken, but maybe I could prevent future atrocities. As the sun climbed higher in the desert sky, I felt strength flowing through my veins. Not just physical strength, but something far more precious and harder to maintain. Determination. This was my moment, fleeting though it might be. The creatures were weakened, confused, forced into hiding by the light they couldn't tolerate. There would be no turning back from this point. The night had stripped away every illusion of safety and normalcy, leaving me raw and exposed, but also somehow purified. I was no longer the naive city boy who had driven into Bluff hoping to impress his girlfriend's family. I was someone else now, a survivor, a witness, possibly a weapon against an ancient evil. The memory of the journal's most important warning echoed in my mind like a mantra. Trust no one. Question every smile. Remember who you are. My journey through this nightmare was far from over, but I was still breathing, still thinking, still fighting. For Emma, for myself, and for everyone who might cross paths with these creatures in the future. I would survive this day, and when night fell again, I would be ready. The monsters had made one critical mistake. They had let me live long enough to learn their weaknesses. Now it was time to use that knowledge against them. As I sat in the growing warmth of the morning sun, surrounded by the testimonies of the dead and dying, I felt something I hadn't experienced in what seemed like lifetimes. Hope. It was fragile, tentative, but it was real. And it was mine. The nightmare was far from over, but for the first time, I believed I might see its end. The sun was my only ally in a desert full of enemies. As the first golden rays crested the canyon rim, I watched from the mining shack's broken window as the nightmare creatures that had hunted me through the night underwent their reluctant transformation back to human form. Their agonized hisses filled the morning air as sunlight touched their twisted bodies, forcing them to compress their elongated limbs and reshape their predatory features into the masks they wore among civilization. Patricia stumbled behind a boulder, her form rippling and contracting until she once again resembled the Matroli woman who had welcomed me with that too-wide smile just 2 days ago. Robert's massive, bestial frame folded in on itself like origami made of flesh and bone, returning to the appearance of a concerned father. Jake's wolf-like anatomy snapped back into teenage proportions, though his eyes retained their inhuman hunger even in daylight. They were weakened now. I could see it in their sluggish movements and the way they avoided direct sunlight. The journal had been right. Dawn was more than just the end of night. It was a weapon that stripped away their supernatural advantages and forced them into vulnerability. But I knew this reprieve was temporary. They would adapt, find shadows to lurk in, and when evening came again, they would resume their hunt with renewed fury. I had perhaps 12 hours before they regained their full power, and I intended to use every precious minute. I gathered what supplies I could from the shack, a rusted knife, an old canteen that still held brackish water, and most importantly, the journal. Its pages contained the only proof that any of this had really happened, the only evidence of the horror that lurked in Bluff, Utah. The trek toward the highway was treacherous, forcing me to navigate between exposed ridges where the skinwalkers could spot me and deep gullies where they could trap me. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes, every rustle of sagebrush might herald another attack. My nerves stretched taut as piano wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. The sun climbed higher, offering both protection and exposure as I made my way across the desert landscape. Sweat soaked through my clothes, and the canteen's meager contents did little to slake my thirst, but I forced myself to maintain a steady pace. Stopping meant death, or worse, capture and a fate like Emma's. It was mid-morning when the psychological warfare began. They appeared one by one, rising from behind rocks and emerging from hidden ravines with the casual ease of family members coming to visit. But these weren't the skinwalkers wearing their stolen faces. These were the faces of everyone I had ever loved, everyone I had ever trusted. My mother stood on a distant ridge, her graying hair catching the sunlight as she cupped her hands around her mouth and called to me. "Michael, honey, why won't you come home? We're so worried about you. You're having some kind of breakdown, sweetie. Let us help you." The voice was perfect, every inflection and vocal tick reproduced with supernatural precision. If I hadn't known better, if I hadn't seen what these creatures were capable of, I might have believed it was really her. The resemblance was so complete, it made my heart ache with longing for the simple life I had lost forever. "You're not real," I called back, forcing steel into my voice. "My mother is 300 miles away, safe in Phoenix." The thing wearing my mother's face tilted its head with an expression of confused hurt that was utterly convincing. "Michael, what's gotten into you? Emma called me last night, said you were acting strange, paranoid. She's worried sick about you." Another figure appeared near a cluster of beryl cacti. My father, dead these past 3 years, looking exactly as he had in life, down to the faded scar on his left hand from a childhood accident. "Son, these people are trying to help you. Don't throw your life away over some fantasy." The cruel efficiency of it stole my breath. They were using my own love against me, turning my deepest attachments into weapons. Part of me knew these were just sophisticated lies, but another part, the part that missed my father desperately and worried constantly about my mother, wanted to believe. "My dad's been dead for 3 years, you sick fucks," I snarled, though tears blurred my vision. "You can wear his face, but you can't bring him back." The false father's expression shifted to one of patient concern. "Michael, you know that's not true. I'm right here. I've always been here. This guilt you're carrying about my death, it's eating you alive, son. Let it go." More figures appeared, surrounding me in a loose circle. My best friend from college, my first girlfriend, co-workers who had worried about me when I took time off for this weekend trip. Each one spoke with perfect knowledge of our shared history. Each one begged me to abandon my desperate flight and accept their twisted version of love. "This is what family looks like," said the thing wearing my father's face. "This is what belonging feels like. Stop running from the people who care about you." The circle began to tighten, their movement subtly predatory despite their familiar faces. I could see the calculation behind their borrowed expressions, the cold intelligence that viewed me as nothing more than a problem to be solved. "Family doesn't hunt," I said, backing away from them. "Family doesn't steal and replace and destroy. You're parasites pretending to be people, and I won't let you fool me." But doubt gnawed at me. What if I really was having a breakdown? What if the isolation and stress had finally snapped something in my mind? The faces around me were so perfect, so beloved, that part of me wanted nothing more than to sink into their arms and let them take away all the fear and confusion. That's when I heard her voice. "Michael, don't listen to them." It wasn't a physical voice. Emma wasn't standing beside me, wasn't even visible among the circle of false loved ones. But I could hear her as clearly as if she were speaking directly into my ear, her voice carrying all the warmth and authenticity that the imitations lacked. "They're using your love against you," the voice continued, and I felt a presence beside me, invisible but unmistakably real. "Twisting it into chains. But real love doesn't bind. It sets you free." I closed my eyes and reached out with more than just my hands, searching for that connection that had always existed between us. And there it was, not physical, but spiritual, a bond that transcended flesh and blood and reached into the deepest parts of our souls. "Emma," I whispered. "I'm here," she said, though I knew she wasn't, not in body anyway. "I've been fighting to reach you, to warn you. They thought breaking my body would break my spirit, but they were wrong. Love doesn't die when the flesh fails, Michael. It endures." The false mother hissed at something she couldn't see, her mask of maternal concern slipping to reveal the predator beneath. "Stop talking to yourself, Michael. There's no one there. You're having a psychotic episode." But I could feel Emma's presence growing stronger, her spirit somehow breaking free of whatever prison held her physical form. "They don't understand what real love looks like," she continued. "They can steal faces and memories, but they can't steal the connection between souls." "How do I know you're real?" I asked silently, not wanting to give the skinwalkers any advantage. "Because you're asking the question," Emma replied with a tenderness that made my heart ache. "The real me taught you to question everything, to think for yourself. That's why they could never truly replace me, because love isn't just about knowing someone's habits or memories. It's about understanding their essence." The circle of false loved ones pressed closer, their expressions growing more desperate as they sensed their psychological hold slipping away. But Emma's presence beside me was like armor against their manipulation. "You have to run now," she urged. "While they're focused on the deception, follow the canyon downstream. It leads to a ravine that opens onto the highway 5 miles from here." "What about you?" I asked desperately. "I can't leave you with them." "You're not leaving me," she said, and I could almost feel her smile. "I'm already free, Michael. They can cage my body, but they can't cage what we have together. That belongs to us forever." The false father took a step forward, his borrowed features twisted with frustration. "Son, you're talking to empty air. Let us help you before you hurt yourself." But I was already moving, Emma's spiritual guidance giving me strength and direction. I sprinted toward a narrow gap between two of the figures, their human forms too sluggish in the sunlight to react quickly enough to stop me. Behind me, inhuman roars of rage echoed off the rock walls as the skinwalkers abandoned their psychological warfare in favor of direct pursuit. But they were weakened by daylight, their movements uncertain as they struggled to maintain their human disguises while chasing their prey. The canyon that Emma had described appeared ahead of me, a narrow cut in the rock that twisted downward toward the distant highway. I could hear the creatures behind me, their forms flickering between human and monstrous as they fought against the sun's weakening effect on their powers. My lungs burned with each breath, and my legs felt like lead, but Emma's presence beside me gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. She couldn't run with me physically, but her spirit guided each step, warning me of loose rocks and dangerous drops. "Almost there," she whispered as the canyon opened onto a broader ravine. "I can see the road." The highway appeared suddenly, a ribbon of black asphalt cutting across the red desert like a lifeline. I could see vehicles moving along it, real people living real lives, completely unaware of the horror that lurked just miles away. A truck driver saw me waving frantically from the roadside and pulled over, his face creased with concern as he took in my battered appearance. "Jesus, buddy, what happened to you? You look like you've been through hell." "Please," I gasped, climbing into the cab of his semi. "I need to get to the police. There's been a murder. Multiple murders." The driver, his name was Carl, I learned later, took one look at my condition and didn't ask questions. He radioed ahead to the next town and drove fast, glancing frequently in his mirrors as if he expected pursuit, but no pursuit came. The skinwalkers were trapped by daylight, forced to watch helplessly as their prey escaped into a world they could not openly enter. As we pulled away from the desert, I felt Emma's presence begin to fade. "I have to go now," she said softly. "They're pulling me back." "Emma, wait." "Remember me," she interrupted, her voice growing distant. "Not the broken thing they turned me into, but the woman who loved you. Remember our real memories, not the lies they told wearing my face. I will, I promised. I love you. I know, she whispered. And then she was gone, leaving me alone with the weight of survival and the responsibility of testimony. The police station in Moab was a small, clean building that smelled of coffee and disinfectant. The sheriff was a weathered man named Hayes who listened to my story with increasing skepticism, his expression shifting from concern to doubt to barely concealed irritation. "Son, there's no family registered at that address in Bluff," he said after making some phone calls. "House has been empty for months according to the county records." "That's impossible," I insisted. "I was just there. They had all these personal belongings, driver's licenses from missing people." "Heat exhaustion can cause vivid hallucinations," Sheriff Hayes interrupted gently. "Dehydration, exposure to extreme temperatures. The mind plays tricks. Why don't we get you checked out by a doctor? Maybe call your family." The journal was still in my backpack, its pages filled with the desperate warnings of previous victims. But when I pulled it out to show the sheriff, something had changed. The handwriting was still there, but it was all in my own hand. Page after page of increasingly frantic notes that looked like the ramblings of a madman. "I didn't write this," I said desperately. But even as the words left my mouth, I could see how it looked. Heat stroke victim found in the desert, carrying a journal filled with paranoid fantasies written in his own handwriting. They kept me overnight for observation, and in the morning, I was released into the custody of my mother, who had driven up from Phoenix with tears in her eyes and relief etched into every line of her face. She held me close and whispered that everything would be all right, that I was safe now. But I knew better. As we drove away from Moab, I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Miss you already, babe. Can't wait to see you again soon. Emma." The message had been sent from Phoenix, my own city, hundreds of miles from the nightmare I had escaped. They had found a way to follow me, or perhaps they had been there all along, waiting patiently for me to return to my normal life. I spent the next weeks researching missing persons cases, following news reports of unexplained disappearances and mapping patterns that others dismissed as coincidence. The network was vast, stretching across the entire Southwest and beyond, a hidden infection spreading through human society like a virus. I changed my phone number, moved to a new apartment, and started carrying iron implements after reading old folklore about protective metals. But I knew it was only a matter of time. They had learned everything about me during our brief time together, and they were patient creatures with very long memories. Every friendly neighbor, every co-worker who asked too many personal questions, every stranger who smiled just a little too widely, they all became suspects in my increasingly paranoid worldview. I found myself studying faces for tiny imperfections, listening for slight vocal inconsistencies, watching for behaviors that didn't quite match the personas being projected. The hardest part was the doubt. In quiet moments, usually late at night when exhaustion wore down my defenses, I wondered if the doctors had been right. If the heat and stress and isolation had finally broken something in my mind. The official story was so much more comfortable than the truth. A simple case of exposure-induced psychosis, easily treated with rest and medication. But then, I would remember Emma's presence in the desert, the way her spirit had guided me to safety when her body could not. That connection had been real, transcending the physical world in a way that no hallucination could replicate. Whatever else might be questioned, that love was genuine, and it had saved my life. Sometimes, late at night, I dream about Emma. Not the broken woman I glimpsed in the Skinwalker's lair, not the hollow-eyed replacement that had mimicked her love, but Emma as she truly was, radiant with life and fierce with determination. In these dreams, we're together again, safe from the monsters that wear familiar faces. But I always wake up alone, in a world where no one believes the warnings of the survivors. The nightmare followed me home, and I know it's only a matter of time before it finds me again. They say you can't go home again. In my case, I'm not sure home exists anymore. I keep the journal on my desk as a reminder of what I witnessed, what I survived, and what might be coming. The handwriting may look like mine now, but I know the truth of what those pages contained. Every entry was a lifeline thrown by someone drowning in the same horror I had experienced. Trust no one. Question every smile. Remember who you are. These have become the rules I live by, the only things standing between me and the fate that befell 23 other people in a collection room in Bluff, Utah. And sometimes when the desert wind blows through Phoenix and I catch a familiar scent on the air, I remember Emma's last words to me. Remember me. Not the broken thing they turned me into, but the woman who loved you. I haven't forgotten. I never will. Because somewhere out there, wearing faces I trust and speaking with voices I love, they're waiting for me to let down my guard. But Emma taught me to question everything, to think for myself, to hold on to the connections that matter most, and that knowledge might be the only thing that saves me when they finally come.